So first up, I'm really happy to be talking to Declan Fox, VP and Head of Linea, who's going to be telling us a little bit about Linea, a lot about Linea native yield, and of course also a little bit of alpha. For those of you that have been watching Twitter today, the Linea airdrop eligibility checker did just drop, and so we might be talking about that if we have a little bit of time to the end. So hey Declan, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself and just tell us like a little bit about Linea and what's going on over there these days.
Yeah, thanks for having me in the inaugural, session as well. So I'm truly honored. Yeah, so hi to everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Declan Fox. I am head of Linea. For those who aren't familiar with Linea, it's a ZK layer 2 on Ethereum. Our goal really is to kind of help scale Ethereum, but also strengthen it at the same time. I think that's like a key sort of goal of ours. We really see Linea as an extension of the layer 1 itself, and so everything we do from our tokenomics to our economics that we'll kind of discuss today, and just our general philosophy is really anchored in making sure that Ethereum wins, and by extension, Linea is a part of that. I guess just a quick bit about me, background in crypto for about 7 or so years. Did a lot of work on the enterprise side, helping a lot of these big institutions, come onto blockchain initially with their own sort of private permission chains before pivoting into sort of ZK and rollups and kind of joining consensus to help, create Linea. What's interesting there is now a lot of these enterprises are coming full circle and looking to deploy on Ethereum or Linea itself. So really have seen the kind of full evolution of this sort of technology that we're all building together. But yeah, happy to kind of be here. It's a great, exciting time for Linea, as you mentioned. We have our TG coming out soon and the airdrop checker released today. So obviously a lot of excitement and kind of, noise there. But yeah, happy to be here and talk about native yield as well, which is a huge sort of part of our upcoming, technical stack. And I think it's really going to make, Linea mainnet stand out, like, amongst the different kind of L2s in the ecosystem.
Awesome. Super great to have you and to be diving into all of the specifics. So maybe, yeah, let's just start from the last point you made. So Linea is an L2. It's obviously like an L2 that has been talked about for a lot. Everybody, knows that like consensus has been around like a long time. And so everybody's wondering what's going to make Linea stand out, or is already making it stand out, but, especially with the TG coming up.
Yeah, so at Linea, we really see Linea being the best chain for ETH. And there's a lot of sort of pieces behind that. One is in terms of ETH capital. So we believe that Linea will provide the best sort of risk-adjusted return for large capital holders, whether that's LPs, funds, or even digital asset treasury companies as well. And that's because of features like the native yield, which we'll touch on, but also other features like every transaction on Linea actually burns ETH directly. So not just like, oh, we settle to the L1 and that burns ETH, but actually every transaction that takes place on Linea will burn 20% in Ether, and then 80% in the Linea token itself. The actual tokenomics as well of Linea is completely designed for the ecosystem. So it actually mirrors the genesis of Ethereum, where 15% is with the sort of foundation, and then 85% actually goes to the ecosystem. And that's actually vesting over a 10-year period. So the goal there is to actually use the token to help sustainably provide funding for open source protocols that kind of make Ethereum and Linea better. And really just thinking long term about how to make this whole, sort of experiment of Ethereum really kind of reach the mass adoption that we all want it to.
The burning mechanism is really interesting and pretty novel in terms of L2s, right? So how does that kind of like work under the hood? Are you setting it to like OX dead or whatever it is, or?
Not quite. So yeah, so for the Ether part itself, we obviously like send that back to the L1, and then we burn it on the L1 just to make sure the assets and liabilities match up across the bridge. Because 80% is also used to burn Linea. That just goes to a sort of contract address held by this new Linea consortium, which actually I'll touch on as well because it's really interesting. But the Linea consortium basically receives 80% of the net profit on the sequencer of the rollup, and then it goes to actually buy and burn the Linea token itself. And the idea there is that again, because the way that the tokenomics are presented, there isn't really much structural sell pressure. Like nothing is going to the VCs or the team. It's very much like an open source protocol, and I kind of see it where like over time, if you invest in the growth of the ecosystem, much like a sort of digital sovereign state, you expect the ecosystem to grow, more transactions will take place, more burning happens, which is almost like tax revenues going back to the sort of protocol. And so we expect it to be a sort of sustainable mechanism that can kind of keep these incentives going over time and really help fund public goods over time. On the Linea consortium, so something quite unique is that we actually don't have a DAO. So it's a little bit different how we constructed Linea. It's actually a consortium of sort of Ethereum-centric institutions. So Consensus is one, but we also have SharpLink, who obviously has SBET, one of the largest, ETH digital asset treasuries in the space. ENS, obviously ENS Labs, all the .ETHs in the space will be very familiar with, ENS being a long-term sort of like key part of the Ethereum protocol. We have Status as well, who are part of the Institute of Free Technology. They build many of the execution and consensus clients on layer one. And then, of course, Eigen Labs as well. So they also are participating as part of the consortium. So yeah, really sort of great stewards to kind of help, direct the protocol and sort of the ecosystem.
Yeah, that sounds like also like a different model. So obviously Lido is, like a pure DAO. And that also comes with its own set of intricacies and complexities, but also interesting kind of like novel organic mechanisms that grow as a result of that. So interesting to see how the model with the consortium also helps you guys kind of develop like a unique position in the ecosystem. So as you mentioned earlier, there's going to be the TGE. You already kind of have like a very good idea around the cycles, like virtuous cycles that will be created through the tokenomics, both the burning of Ether and also burning some of the sequencer fees to kind of contribute back towards like the Linea token itself. So is this like already live? Should users already start, moving their ETH over to Linea, and how can they do that?
So the burn mechanism will go live immediately after the TGE, which is next week. We announced that earlier today. So on the 10th of September, we'll launch the Linea token. From the 11th of September onwards, the net profits on the sequencer will go towards this burning of Ether and Linea. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, really, really cool. And if somebody wants to bridge over to Linea, what's the easiest way for them to do that right now?
The easiest way is actually, we have our own Linea native bridge, which has a great sort of user experience. You can choose two different options. You can choose the sort of the fast path, which is sort of widget using LeFi, and that aggregates over many of the sort of third-party bridges, but comes with some like slight additional risk assumptions. Or you can use the actual native bridge, which takes a few minutes longer, 15 minutes, let's say, but actually uses the kind of Linea protocol itself. And so for larger LPs or users, we recommend the native bridge. If you're just a small user and you want to go and check out Linea, just use the sort of third-party ones, but it's all in the same place. So that's linea.build/bridge.
Got it. Thank you. And is there also any way for people to bridge if they're like on a centralized exchange or something like that?
So some of the exchanges do have direct integration to Linea. After next week, a lot more will. So after the TG, a lot of the sort of tier one exchanges will support Linea, and you'll be able to kind of deposit and withdraw using them as well.
Got it. Okay. So I think that's like a pretty good segue, if a little bit on the nose, to talk directly about like native yield. So one bridges their ETH. What does native yield basically mean for them, and how does it unlock DeFi opportunities on the Linea side? Yeah,
so I think just taking a step back, a lot of rollups today, they have a lot of ETH sitting like idle in the L1 smart contract, right? And I think what native yield does is it turns that idle ETH into essentially like an active economic force on the L2. Okay, so what happens is you get this ETH, it's going to be staked on the L1, it earns staked ETH rewards, and then these rewards get distributed to DeFi on the L2 on Linea. So you could imagine essentially extra rewards happening on Aave when you deposit ETH on Aave on Linea. And not only is that interesting from like providing people a better yield on the L2, but it actually also supports the L1 economic budget as well, because this ETH is being staked. So again, I mentioned our goal of Linea is to scale and strengthen Ethereum. This helps to scale Ethereum because we're providing better opportunities for LPs and for DeFi. We also strengthen it because we're increasing the amount of ETH that will be staked. And we believe that this is very attractive to especially large holders of ETH, digital asset treasuries in particular, who can actually go and put their ETH to use, and whilst also making sure the ecosystem grows. I think that's a key difference between what you see in perhaps the Bitcoin community, where BTC is not a productive asset. ETH is a productive asset, and that's kind of like our thesis of like why we think Ethereum is going to win and why we want to be the best chain for ETH. So yeah, I guess that's like the kind of cycle maybe to highlight it. So that ETH yield like funds the sort of liquidity rewards on Linea. That creates like a deep pool of liquidity. As we know, that attracts more users and trading and things because you have deep capital markets. And then that in turn, liquidity begets more liquidity and creates a sort of positive feedback loop. And again, the more stake we get as well, the more yield. So yeah, it's really about aligning incentives for ETH DeFi, but also the L1 sort of security piece as well.
Got it. Thanks for explaining that. And so basically, like ETH on the Linea side is staked ETH, if you want to think about it that way. Like the yield is kind of like built into it, but you don't receive it directly like on the ETH itself. It's kind of like pooled in a distributor contract, I guess, that helps power incentives towards the different like users that are interacting with Linea in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, that's correct. So if you just bridge ETH and then hold it passively on Linea, you won't directly receive the rewards from the staked ETH on the L1. If, however, you go and deposit into, like a lending market, then you will actually get back the ETH that you bridged over, like the yield on the ETH that you bridged over, and also additional incentives from like the ETH that isn't being deposited. So that actually includes like a bonus as well. And the sort of rationale there is that we really want to incentivize like active liquidity. Like active liquidity is what really makes the whole DeFi sort of ecosystem flourish, rather than just holding, ETH passively. Of course, people can continue to do that. And we made sure that the risks are mitigated with, working with Lido and like a bunch of the other decisions we made in the design. But really, if you want to maximize your yield, you need to go and supply ETH into the, the DEXs or the money markets on Linea.
Got it. And so you mentioned it, but obviously it's like one of the big reasons that we're here on this call together.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the partners that was selected to basically enable at least the ETH staking portion of the native yield mechanism is Lido, and specifically a product that is coming out soon as a part of the Lido V3 upgrade that's called Lido ST Vaults, which basically allows for like tailored staking setups that still give access to staking via Lido. Can you talk us through a little bit around the decision-making rationale around choosing Lido versus potentially doing like a totally custom staking setup? And how does like the modularity and composability address the needs that you guys foresaw?
Yeah. Well, you nailed it. I think the key thing in particular about Lido V3 is that composability and control. So like the sort of staked vaults on Lido V3, they don't mint staked ETH by default, which is a way for us to have more control about the security and like the risk of like when we're essentially having ETH on Linea from the bridged ETH, which is important because we don't want to introduce any fragmentation on Linea. We want to make sure that ETH is still like perceived as ETH in terms of the DeFi, because that's important for like composability. It also gives us a lot of control over like which validators we're selecting as well. So we're bootstrapped by Consensus. Consensus also has a bunch of validators that it runs. There's many other sort of great teams running validators, institutional grade with amazing sort of guarantees, and we can over time start to see different validators selected. But what's actually important about that is that some sort of like businesses that you talk to when it comes to these sorts of coming on chain, they actually like to deal with a single counterparty. So being able to say, oh, like the validators are also part of the same system is it helps in terms of bringing them actually on chain. So that was a key piece. And I think just the modularity as well. So actually being able to kind of separate cleanly the like staking logic from the liquidity and the distribution mechanisms that I mentioned to actually get those rewards to Linea DeFi. It's just going to make any sort of upgrade in the future more seamless, integrations far easier. And of course, like, this is something maybe we could have built from scratch ourselves, but it's much more simpler and more secure just to use something that you guys had worked on at Lido with the V3 in particular. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you mentioned earlier that basically the version of the vaults that you'll be using is a version where you don't anticipate to be minting STETH often or a lot of it.
Yeah.
How do you envision STETH potentially being used through like by the native yield mechanism?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things there is, you can almost think of it as like a bank, and you obviously don't want to have every ETH that's like bridged to Linea sort of staked. So you introduce what's called like a liquidity buffer, which is very similar to anyone who's worked in banking, how they approach risk and mitigations there. And so what actually happens is, again, this is all a single non-custodial flow, but behind the scenes, only the ETH like above a sort of configurable liquidity buffer is staked. And then that staked ETH accrues inside the Lido stake vault without minting staked ETH. However, as a user, if you want to withdraw and for whatever reason liquidity buffer is reached, you can actually mint staked ETH to then withdraw fast as well. So one of the key things there is it allows us to build this mechanism in a way that gives users the optionality and really reduces the risk of when they want to withdraw from Linea back to the L1. And that was like a real sort of key part of the design that we really liked for V3.
Got it. So it's almost adding like extra optionality, especially during times of high withdrawal, as like an ad hoc secondary buffer, if a user wants to use something like that in lieu of, or if there's like max capacity on the primary buffer.
Yeah, exactly. And like, maybe, there's obviously waiting for the ETH to be unstaked from the sort of Ethereum's exit queue as well. Like the goal is to not introduce any extra finality, like latency for withdrawals, because that's an important thing for, market makers, LPs, like if people need to rebalance across chains. But again, as you mentioned, this fallback mechanism gives people the optionality. And I think that's really key.
Makes a lot of sense. How do you see native yield evolving maybe? Like, are there other kinds of rewards mechanisms that may be in store for the future, or are there already kind of like DeFi-based mechanisms that we haven't talked about on the call yet that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I can imagine, adding some more like vault strategies. I think initially we will expect to see things happen somewhat more manually, just to kind of understand the mechanism and the different sort of DeFi strategies that people want to use, whether that's lending into a money market and doing any sort of looping. I can imagine in the future, someone who wants to do all that in like one swift movement without any of the sort of under the hood complexities could just access a vault on top of to Lido V3 on the L1, where it like bridges your funds and then deposits into an Aave or an Euler or something, and then actually automatically gets you the yield, like claiming the yield as well, each epoch, and all that just happening completely automated for you, whether that's for your own sort of vault or like even through agents. I think there's a lot to be done there in terms of the user experience.
That's very interesting. And how does that kind of the creation of almost like a template mechanism, if you want to think about it this way, or an abstracted concept around how you can use yield to empower layer twos, extend into the vision of promulgating like native yield as a mechanism across Linea stack. So like other L2s or even like L3s that are built on top of Linea, how might they be able to take advantage of that? Because it's like it is a new thing, and it is of course built to like the standards and specification of Linea, but any Linea stack chain can integrate it, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, anyone building on the Linea stack can also, enable this feature. It will be a sort of like feature flag where you can choose to have it or choose to not. There's absolutely, I believe this will become table stakes personally, like across all L2 stacks. I think we're sort of pioneering here, and I believe that sort of anyone to be competitive will need to offer the same thing. But then how do you actually apply it in a way that's unique for your chain? Because I think if you're going to launch your own chain, having launched a chain, there's a lot to it. So you really need to have a solid go-to-market of how you're differentiating. One sort of team I'll call out is Status. So they're actually launching their L2 on the Linea stack, and they're going to be leveraging the native yield feature in a very interesting way. They're very much focused on sort of consumer use cases, gaming in particular, where users aren't used to paying fees. Even if it's like microtransactions, I think the idea of like paying fees for an action on the game is very, it's not very relatable for people coming from Web 2 into the space. And so what they're doing is actually using the native yield, like that's generated on the L1, the staked ETH yield. They're actually then going to use that to offset the gas costs, so people can transact on the L2 for free, and then just introducing a sort of like a spam mechanism, because of course if transactions are free, someone could spam it. So it's a very clever system where you can basically use it and play games for free on an L2, as long as you don't do some pattern that shows you're just kind of spamming. And that's all going to be enabled through the native yield on the Linea stack.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I'd love to like hear more details about that spam mechanism. I'll have to talk to somebody from Status about that, because I mean, people will spam things even if they cost money, right? Like we saw it on Ethereum mainnet a couple of years ago with like a Zen token or something. So
Exactly.
it'll be
Yeah.
really interesting how they approach that. Okay, we are a little bit pressed for time, but obviously there is like at least one more question that we want to get to or thing to talk about. So you mentioned earlier, you know, like the interesting aspects of launching your own chain. TGE is a big part of that. Today, you guys announced like the airdrop checker. Any kind of like commentary that you want to add around that? Any notes? I don't know. Telling users what to expect.
Yeah, I think, again, it's always interesting when you're doing an airdrop because, you're trying to put the sort of ownership of the protocol in as many people's hands as possible, right? This is, we're all here for decentralization. We're also here to kind of like identify and reward participation as best as we can. I think we had a very transparent system when building Linea. We had this LXP program, which kind of very clearly measured and rewarded participation in the kind of 2 years that we've been on mainnet up until this TGE moment. I think it's been a sort of very sort of fair and sort of transparent process. But it's really just the start. And so that's something I keep telling to the team and anyone that like, it's almost like, TG is like having a child almost. It's like the beginning, right? And I think very much for us, like we see this as like the pivot point for things just to accelerate further, like our mission, our goals. I think the success of Linea mainnet, this is really just the very beginning. And because of the tokenomics I mentioned, right? No VCs, no team. I mean, everyone's sidelined apart from the airdrop recipients. So, you're getting in first before all the funds and everyone else. So, I think that's a real unique thing about Linea.
Yeah, I agree. That's really unique, and I think it harkens back to a lot of kind of like the ideological presets around blockchains, cryptocurrencies, um, re-enfranchising smaller actors in an already like very disbalanced space, which is finance. And so I was really like delighted to basically hear how the TGE was formed, like what the allocations would be, the community forward focus around how Linea intends for its system to work. And I think native yield is going to be a really big part of that. And hopefully, like you say, table stakes for how L2s are going to be working in the future. So yeah, I think we probably need to wrap up really quick. I don't see any questions directly from chat, but there's a lot of people basically just saying that Linea is awesome, and I think they can't wait for their airdrop. So really looking forward to of course like the TGE happening, the burning mechanism turning on. People love the burn. There's already like these these synthetic representations, of burn tokens. I wonder if those are going to gain value or not at some point. But yeah, looking forward to all of that, and of course, the close collaboration between Lido and Linea in terms of unlocking native yield. Thanks a lot for joining us.